Hello and welcome to the podcast. Today, guys, we have an awesome talk with Omegawave's Tim Rusbasan. Tim and I get to sit down, and obviously, coming from Omegawave, we're going to talk monitoring, and we're going to start out talking about the whole idea of needing to have an idea and a direction that you want to go in when you start implementing anything when it comes to monitoring. And this is really important, and it's something that I think people get caught up in a little bit where they think, oh, we're going to start doing all this stuff and all these crazy things are going to happen, but they don't know how or what they're looking for or what they're planning. And those are obviously some key things. Then we get into how communication is still key. You need to talk to your athletes. You need to be able to see those visual signs of how they are. You need to be able to talk to them and figure out how their days are and how they're handling stress and what actually is going on with them. Not just run with the monitoring and let that indicate everything. And getting into the idea of making decisions and changes, you kind of need to pump your brakes a little bit before you start throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Looking at, what the numbers are telling you and what directions you should take doesn't necessarily mean that you need to sit there and take everything you were doing and scrap it and start over. And then really the biggest thing with all of it is normalizing the data and understanding that you're working with an N of 1, and you guys have heard me and other people say that, and Tim talks about that too. And understanding that changes for them may be different for changes for you, and that each kid will adapt and have different changes and fluctuations based on whatever stressors are occurring. So, normalizing the data is super important. And then the whole idea of the cost of adaptation. And this is something that to be totally honest, I had no idea about until I got involved with Omegawave. And Tim does a really good job explaining it and talking about it and getting it a little easier for people to wrap their minds around, because it is something that is a little difficult. At least it was for me, to be totally honest, when we first started using the system to understand what this whole thing was. He really does do a great job communicating that here. So hope you guys enjoy the talk as much as I did. Let's get right to it. Tim, thanks for being on, man. Appreciate you taking the time.
Hey, well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so obviously, being a coach and then moving into a different realm, now being really immersed in the monitoring world. How about we start talking about some things that you've seen, some pros and cons, some goods and bads, and some things that coaches can take home right away here from the talk.
I think that the most common problem that people run into is maybe getting a little ambitious when they start spending money with buying these new systems. I mean, everyone wants a new toy to play with. I mean, we just had Christmas, so everyone's excited. But I think you need to have a plan before you start going and doing anything. You can't just say, oh, Omegawave's great and these people are using it and they're using it well, and then, say we need to have this, or it could be Catapult, it could be whatever. You really need to know, is it going to make me a better coach? What is it telling me? If you buy a system, you don't know what it's telling you. I mean, you could take that time if you have the ability. Some people are put in a situation where they can get a system and just see what it tells them before they even start utilizing it, and that's often great. But I mean, if you're working in college athletics, you need results immediately. So I mean, that's just one example, but you need to have a plan and have a clear idea of what it's going to tell you, and is it going to make you better at your job. I think a lot of people just assume that it's system A, B, or C is going to make them a better coach, and often, I think Hank said this at his first talk at your Omegawave, not Omegawave, at the Central Virginia Sport Performance Seminar, was that Omegawave, just as an example, can make a good coach better, or it can make a mediocre coach just as mediocre. Something along those lines is that if you don't know what you're doing, it's going to provide you with misleading information, or it might provide you with information overload where you just don't even know where to start. Or even say you know what you're going to use, and you buy, Catapult, Omegawave, Polar systems, you buy all this stuff at once, and you try to work all of these systems together starting from scratch. I think there's a learning curve for each device, and if you try to get a little bit too ambitious, you get overwhelmed, and then you start to think that maybe what you're doing is wrong because you don't even know how to look at the data to begin with. So you can run yourself into your own problems because you're rather than coaching and using this to make those changes, you become like an IT support person trying to troubleshoot problems that you're having with the systems itself. So, and I think the good things that you can do with it is there's very simple solutions to some problems that you might have. Microsoft Excel, everybody has that. If you work at a university, you have your own computer, you have Microsoft Excel. It's a incredibly powerful tool that you can utilize, even taking like wellness surveys and then plotting that over time, seeing, you know what your workouts you do, so you can plug all that in there, find correlation of just, what you're already doing without throwing in, a couple $1,000 system. So there's very simple solutions. You can get polar heart rate straps. I mean, they're dirt cheap nowadays on Amazon, and you can use those very effectively with your training. And so you sometimes you don't have to shoot for the moon on your first try. I mean, you can just utilize your budget where you can and effectively, and then once you start figuring out what you need next, that way you can make that decision. All right, this would really help me if I had this system, because this is what I want to look at. So you need to have like a clear idea of where you want to go, and how you're going to use it.
Okay, so now a coach has an idea and they know where they want to go. So let's talk about some people that you're working with now, and let's talk about some things that people are doing well out there. What do you see out there when it comes to this realm of whatever we want to call it now, high performance or
I think that people don't surprisingly talk to their athletes enough. They don't know what's going on in their personal lives because the everyday stress of if you're a student athlete, so like exams and like personal stuff, so like relationships, maybe they break up with their boyfriend or girlfriend, stuff going on at home, financial issues. I mean, all of that's going to have a huge effect on how your body performs, your functional state. So if you don't talk to your athletes and know what's going on, like how can you try to figure out what's the cause of what you're seeing to begin with? When I was up at Michigan Tech under Tomey, we would just talk to our athletes before we started, they're rolling out, warming up, all that. And you could probably get a pretty good picture of as soon as they walk through the door, before you even talk to them, just based on body language, what's outside their norm. Are they being less talkative than normal? Are they just being like quiet? Do they just look, like their head down, shoulders slumped? I mean, you've seen it. Mm-hmm. And so like you could get a good picture and maybe make those changes in your head before even talking with them. Now, I think Chris Morris and Eric Corum, what they were doing at Kentucky was incredible. I mean, if you haven't read it, for people out there, the dissertation, the fluid periodization model, I mean, it's incredible. It's some groundbreaking stuff. I mean, utilizing Omegawave to make those changes on the fly. I mean, that's the big challenge, is performing in competition. And as a strength coach or high performance coach, sometimes you don't know really what you can change and what you have the power to change. Like you have this plan that's great on paper, but then when you get into season, all these wrenches are thrown in left and right, injuries and travel schedules and exams and whatever else might be going on. And can you make those modifications to make sure that they can just go out and play when it matters? So incorporating, making those minor adjustments based on the individualized data help them, be very successful. So that high performance model where you look at all the pieces together and make sure that you're making the changes when they need it, not just based upon what you think is going to happen, is a really, really strategic tool for any coach, whether or not it's football players, basketball players. I mean, the travel schedule that you guys have with basketball, it can be insane sometimes. So like, and we know that travel is one of the hugest effects on the athlete readiness, because you think about the quality of sleep they're going to get in the hotel. You think about just sitting and traveling for a long time, I mean, that just burns you out, even though you're not doing anything. So you can maybe optimize that whole process. So finding those changes, looking at the big picture is the key. And then I think don't try to change everything at once, no matter what you're doing. People love to get trigger happy and they say, oh, I got all this data. I know that this, and this is going wrong. And I know that, these people, they changed this and this and they saw this result. But, each person's going to respond differently to a change. So you need to see what's going to happen before you try to change another thing, really. If it's something like you're changing their diet, or like food after practice, or protein shakes, or if you're supplementing something different, you want to see, maybe that's what you need. If you want to change the type of training that they're doing, you really want to see what's going to happen after you do it. You can't just go and do all of it at once, because then you don't know what caused what result. So it's not as straightforward when you do that sort of modification.
Mm-hmm. No doubt about it. And it's a matter of understanding that. I think the other thing that you need to be ready for is you're going to think you have a lot of answers when at the end of the day you have a lot of questions.
Oh, yeah.
And when you think you have an answer, you need to be ready for that answer to be the thing that has you dog cussing something in the back of your office because it just freaking worked last week. Why didn't it work this week?
Exactly.
Not that you witnessed any of those ever, but yeah, because I think saying trigger happy is a very good term. I think that people get like that a lot. I think they get really ready to say, oh, we've got all this stuff and we just need to look at everything and just dive right in and blah, 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 because it says A, B, or C. But the other thing people need to remember is people are people. So there are some people who are just going to be X, where there are some people that are just going to be Y. So taking time to normalize the data is almost as important as just initially collecting it. So how about you touch upon that for a little bit so that people can kind of understand really the process that kind of we went through, I'll say accidentally, but we kind of did, we might have taken too long, but that's neither here nor there.
You live and you learn, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so normalizing data is this pretty interesting concept where you look at the individual athlete, I think, as you like to say, the N of one, versus the teams. And then, one of the things that you can look at is, some people's bodies just run different ways, whether or not some people are more parasympathetic naturally. And oftentimes, I'm sure you could attest to this, is like when you see an athlete that's like they're very reserved and quiet, and they can still go out there and perform and it matters, but like when you look at their Omegawave data, like more often than not, they're just very parasympathetic all the time. And over time, you start to realize that maybe that's just normal for them. And you would always think to try to change and make it so you bring them back into the norm. That's the norm for everybody, but maybe that's not the norm for them. Maybe that's their 10 on the scale of 1 to 10 is this value that might be suboptimal for somebody else. So you have to figure out, all right, athlete A and athlete B are reading this versus this. All right, well, let's look what was their average like for like last year as a whole. Like what did they look like, as over time, whether or not that's in training period, whether or not that's in season. Let's look at what happened to them and how they perform. So you have performance markers. When we were working together, we looked at vertical jump data and sprint times and their lifting data. And, we compared all that to Omegawave. And, over time, you start to figure out, I mean, they're still setting PRs. So obviously, they're not really suboptimal. Or, I mean, obviously, there's room for improvement. But at the same time, you can't argue with facts. They're playing very well. They're breaking PRs. They're, just a monster when it comes to like numbers in the weight room.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe Omegawave saying that they're super parasympathetic and where they're just depressed. So rather than being a green, they might be like amber, but could just be one or two of their systems is just normally outside of that norm, and so that's normal for them. So you can start to look at that individual changes, and then with that, when you start to see these norms for an athlete that's more individualized, you can see those changes that might be flags for them. So rather, if they're constantly, let's just use that parasympathetic example, if they're constantly parasympathetic, you can see those minor fluctuations for them that might be outside of their norm, and that's when you say, all right, well, what's going on here? So rather than they're always flagged because they're always parasympathetic, you say, all right, well, it's outside this kind of normal range for them. That's when I need to start making those adjustments. So as an individual how you should expect him to respond, and what should normally happen based on X, Y, and Z, because that's what they've done for 2 years worth of data. And then that's when it's outside of that, and it's all right, well, this doesn't make sense, so let's go figure out what happened. And then that's when you can individualize for each individual athlete. Now it might be more difficult if you're working with like a football team, you have 90 guys. I don't think that would be a one-person position to be able to sit there and go through every athlete. But you have the advantage where you're working with 15 guys at a time, and while it's still very time-consuming, I mean, I remember sitting there for a couple hours, a week at least, just plugging in the numbers, let alone looking at what they were saying. So, it becomes very time-consuming if you really want to individualize it, but I think at the end of the day, I mean, that's what's important. You want to make sure you're giving them what's best for them,
Right.
not, that not what's best for the team as a whole.
Right. And just piggybacking back a little bit, or just backtracking, there are ways to tell if these systems are, quote, their norm versus whether they actually are in a state where they're stuck.
Right.
So it's not just like there aren't steps to take to make sure that player A is just like this. It's, because if you start and they've already started
if they come in overtrained,
right, then it is what it is.
Right.
And you need to handle that accordingly. But once those things have been identified and eliminated, is that the word? I don't know. But you know what I mean.
Right.
Like we know those aren't issues. Right now, to throw a plug for Kevin and Coach Me Plus, what we have is like 5-day rolling averages to 10-day rolling averages with resting heart rate. Gosh, I can't even remember what the reading is, but your parasympathetic, your HRV score, an omega tree, weighted versus the trim score from practice, weighted versus their questionnaire, to give us our own like combo red, amber, green for the day. And then when those things are not ready to go, if there's been big changes, then we go back and we have a sub menu where it shows us where the changes are, and then we can go from there.
I think the advantage of that system for your guys especially, or anybody, is that you're going to have athletes who are always going to say that I'm good to go, and their leg could be broken, and they're like, put me in, coach,
Right.
And then you're going to have guys who, like, let's say if we're using a scale 1 to 5, they're going to show up as a 2 every day because maybe they're a little bit of a baby, they don't know what they can really handle, and they think that everything's the end of the world. And so, but once you normalize it, like, all right, well, say every day they're a 3 because they just always think that that's where they're at, then that's when you can see, all right, well, they put a 1 today. Let's figure out what, so that way you can individualize it too, and then figure out, hopefully, I mean, wellness surveys are so subjective, and a lot of times they just want to, they want to give the impression that they're good to go because they think that it might affect their playing time or whatever it might be, but it'll at least help you. And I think.
Well, and I think too that like how we established it with that aspect is that we said, well, the days that they are who they are, whether you're just an Eeyore and you're just going to put that you're a 10 out of 25, or you're a wannabe soldier and you put you're a 24 out of 25, The days you put that are the days they probably don't even think about it. There's like I'm a 3-3-3-4-4.
Yeah.
You know, the days that they think about stuff and there's changes. Well, now those are the days that there's conversations to be had. Because if they're
Right.
actually gonna, if they're just the same and they just throw their stuff in and it's just
Mm-hmm.
like, then they're the same. Then that's just who they are. You know, I mean, that's just who the person is. It's just like, yeah, I'm me. Um, but I think that the whole idea of the N of one and normalizing the data and understanding that people need to be looked at as what they are is really important. Like with all of this,
Yeah.
even like we have a general training load that we look at for practice, um, because we found just correlations with performance and numbers going over with like team stuff. The next thing that we're looking at now is just like individuals and like load per minute, and like what are averages with that versus what are their RPE scores based on it. So understanding what the normative expenditure for one of these student athletes is the next step, so that we know, coming in, was yesterday's practice hard. Like we practiced yesterday. Was yesterday's practice hard for this kid? If it was, how are we going to change the training?
Yeah.
Um,
And I think if you can even facilitate that conversation with the athlete, you can even look at it as a benefit to you because you can build that trust. So you say, like if they just normally go through the motions and, you don't say anything because they're going through the motions, and that's when they make that, they think about it, they make the change, and you go, is everything good? They maybe figure out that you care,
mm-hmm.
and hopefully when that happens, they start to buy into it a little more because they figure, oh, he wants me to, you can explain that you want to help them perform at their best level, and once you get that trust, I mean, Chris Morris said it best. I mean, if they don't, if you don't, the athlete doesn't trust in your decision making or think that you're there to help them, and they're not going to care, and then it's not going to matter.
Right, right. And still, at the end of the day, you're going to have kids that,
Yeah, they just don't care. I mean,
right.
that's people.
Yeah, totally. And they're a little big for their britches, especially for where they are. So I mean, it's because somebody who is a pro or is a superstar acts one way, they think that that's how they're supposed to act, and
I
it's
think
the
it'll come back to bite them in the butt eventually too.
yeah,
So
it's just the unfortunate commonplace that is turning into this world we live in. Um, so then moving forward, let's talk about what we do with the data and how we can then look at this stuff and interpret it and changes that can be made. You brought up Chris and Eric and what they did with that paper, and
mhm.
I put that below. Put that below on Chris's talk. I can repost it again. I'm fine. I have no problem doing that. I mean, it's things real. You should read it if you haven't. But let's talk about that. I mean, you've been coast to coast over the pond a few times. Let's talk about some things people are doing well. Let's talk about, when they're looking at their data, what are some things that people are doing to help their kids get better?
um, I mean, you can utilize the system, or at least if we're looking at Omegawave, there's a bunch of different ways that you can look at like our data. Like you could take an assessment in the morning, like say like 20, 30 minutes after you wake up, and you can look at, how well did you recover from the previous day, whether or not it's workout, stresses of work, traveling, whatever it might be. You can see the effect of the cumulative day, which can be beneficial because you might, say, all right, I might not train today because I'm still shot. Or you could say, oh, wow, like I only got 6 hours of sleep and, my CNS is still really depressed. So you can kind of look at it that way. You can take it right before you train, which is really beneficial to making modifications. Because I know one of the things that we saw when I was there at Richmond was that, the kids who came in at 8 a.m. for a lift versus like 4 p.m. in the afternoon after sitting in class for 4 to 6 hours was that more often than not, their CNS was shot because, sitting there and trying to focus. And I mean, Richmond's not an easy school,
Yeah.
so to speak. I mean, you really have to work, and those guys do, they work to get the grades. And I mean, there's a biological cost to sit there and focus. And so, if we didn't have that data, we might not have made some of those changes, which at the end of the day, it might not have had an effect, but at the same time, there might be more risk to doing some of that, like maybe if you're doing explosive stuff when your CNS is in a state of fatigue, not the best idea. So you can utilize it in that sense to make sure that you're giving them what they need. And then the last one would be, after training, you could see how they responded to a workout, and then maybe figure out what recovery protocols might be best for the athlete. If they're really sympathetic, you might just want to have them do light tissue massage or roll out. Or, if they're running chronically parasympathetic, you might have them do the contrast bath or, like deep tissue massage. It can change. So it's like one of the things is knowing what you're seeing with the data, and then have a plan. If we see this, do we back off in the weight room a little bit? Pull back, or say cut reps, or take out the last set. So making those modifications, based upon maybe what your athlete's telling you. If you're using Omegawave, if you're using wellness surveys, based upon polar data, like if some athlete A versus athlete B, like if we're talking about load per minute, if one guy is running twice the load per minute as the other guy, because maybe he's not fit enough, or maybe he's just in a state of fatigue for one reason or another, and so his body's just having to work that much harder to keep up with everybody else. I mean, that can tell you something in its own. I think Kevin at Coach Me Plus had a great example. He talked about pre and post body weight. It's something very simple that you can do to look at. Are you giving them what they need after practice, hydrating them enough? Are they maybe even doing too much? So no matter what you're looking at, you need to maybe have a plan. I mean, as you know, you can have a plan, but it's never going to run exactly according to plan. But at least that gives you options. So that way you can think about, all right, this is what I would have done based upon seeing this. All right, so maybe I have to make this kind of minor change to that. So it really depends on what data you're looking at that gives you the option of how you can change it. If you're just looking at vertical jump data, like say you take a vertical jump before lifting every day, or once a week, whatever it might be, and you see that drastic decrease. All right, is it because they're fatigued from just volume of practice and traveling, or is it just their CNS? I mean, so like talking with them, seeing how they feel. Do they just feel groggy? If they have that like I didn't wake up well, I mean, maybe that's probably their CNS is just like that wakefulness isn't there. So like you might just need some sort of explosive activities to get them up and moving. You could so it really depends on the situation, but you really have to know what you should see, and then like what it's probably telling you, whatever you're using.
So like you have to understand what the normal information for that person was to begin with.
Exactly. And I mean, this is where I hate to say this, but like if you don't understand the basic principles of training, like you're not going to be able to use any system effectively. And a lot of people think that I'll take a Omegawave, for example. It's like that's going to tell them everything they need to know, and that they're going to be able to do everything. And that's not something that we would ever claim, is that it's a piece of the puzzle, and it'll help you. But it's not, you can't just say, all right, I have this assessment data for my athlete. What do I have to do next?
Right.
Never, ever are you going to be able to do that. I mean, if you need to know what they did the day before, you need to know what type of training, like if you're just working with them in a weight room, or what type of sport athlete are they doing? Say it's high school swimmer, maybe they swim for a club team and their high school team, so they're doing 2-a-day practices with a ton of volume. I mean, if you don't know that, I mean, how are you going to make the change to what you're doing? I mean, it's so you have to know the big picture in order to really make the best decision, regardless of whatever you're doing.
Right. And so going back, you have to have a baseline to understand what the individual is.
Yep.
You have to understand just a general needs analysis of the sport, or as Keir said, that postcard idea where, what either you do well or people that play your position in your sport do well that separates them. And then you kind of need to know just a a general needs analysis of the student athlete or the athlete. I mean, not everybody works in college. Of the athlete in general. If you know that a kid is not very good with their aerobic stuff, maybe they're a person that you just, their fitness is what their weak point is. Maybe if they come back on a day and it's telling you maybe today's not the day to go, but today's a fitness day, and they usually come back the next day after they don't go for the lifting or jumping or speed or agility or whatever is the next day. Well, maybe you should spend your money today anyway and get that money back tomorrow, because, I mean, now, not saying that works out 100% all the time, but just saying that where do you need to make the investment? Or
Right.
is it a kid that, like, it doesn't matter? Like, they're not good at this, but it doesn't matter because either A, sport, or B, how they play the sport. So
Mm-hmm.
do you even need to, if today's a day where it says to back them down, is it just an easy day to back them down because
Yeah,
it doesn't matter?
I think a great concept to understand is the cost of adaptation. And I think when people talk about Omegawave, they think, all right, it says that my speed and power is down. I'm not going to be able to go out there and perform speed and power workout. That's not true at all. I mean, you could possibly even go out and set like a PR for yourself
Mm-hmm.
for whatever type movement if it's explosive when you're in that decreased functional state. But you're going to have to pay a hell of a lot more when it comes down like for that activity. And so more often athletes think that's like, they don't want to use, or they stop taking assessments because it might be telling them that they're always, suboptimal, they're always in the yellow or red for some stuff. And they say, oh, it's telling me I'm bad, I'm not going to be able to perform. And then they, mentally they kind of check themselves out because it's saying that, but it's no, like you're going to get to a point, like you can still go and train. Like if you have a competition, absolutely. Like that's what matters. You're training for competition. So,
Right.
no one's ever going to tell you to not go out on the court because your Omegawave rating's low, or, your wellness survey sucks. You're not going to go out and play. But you just have to understand, it's like we might have to think about this a couple weeks from now or a couple months from now or halfway through the season when you start hitting that wall because you keep going and going and going without letting your body catch back up. I mean, that just it sets you up for failure. It puts you in that position where you risk blowing your
Mm-hmm.
ACL or, whatever it might be. You
Or
have to
just
think about the
playing like
risk.
shit.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, like, you could just suck. Like, I mean, like let's not go so far as to say you could blow your knee out, which, I mean, no one would ever wish that on anybody. Like,
No.
but injuries happen. But if you keep pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing, because you just say, I'm better than the machine, or this is wrong, or I feel fine, eventually you are going to run out of gas.
Yeah.
I mean, cars break down and they're made out of steel. Like, people ain't steel, man. Like there's times you got to pump your brakes. And I think that, like, everybody needs to understand that the hierarchy goes competition, everything else. Like, nothing else really matters.
Yep.
We need to
I think Joseph said it best. It's like the CTC, cut the check.
Yeah.
Like did you win the championship? That's all that matters.
Right. Yeah, just win the games. And
Yeah.
now, is all that other stuff important? Of course it is. But if you're beat up and it's telling you, today may not be the best day to do explosive activities with one of your athletes, that doesn't mean you can't do it. That just means that you might not be able to float that bill and you got to pay for it with a credit card.
Yeah.
Now, what we do, and you've been a big part of us moving to this direction, is depending on the guy, not all of them, but depending on the guy. For example, one of them, senior today, practice yesterday was a bear. Like, yo, man, so how we're coming in today based on all that, you want to cut the reps by a third or you want to lighten the weight up? I'll just cut the reps by 2 or 3. Cool. Feel it out, man. If that feels good, keep going. If you get going for a bit and you're like, oh man, this stuff, this just feels heavy.
Yeah.
All right. You know what? Then flip it. Just let me know. Like some of these kids need to understand that they need to make some of those decisions, and
That's what I loved about the 20s. Because when I was working with Matt up there, and we had some smart athletes. I mean, we're talking,
Right.
Michigan Tech. What people don't realize is that like number two engineering school behind MIT, and so
Yeah.
we're mostly working with engineers there. And there's kids who get into MIT that don't get into Michigan Tech. I mean, it's kind
Yeah.
of crazy. So like we could talk about and explain how the system worked. And it's like if you're tired and say your plan today is to hit 20, and you can only hit 17, like great, do that. Like
Yeah.
that's probably, if your body's telling you to stop, then stop. Like it's simple as that. That whole mentality of oh, like your body tells you to stop, you need to do 5 more reps. Like, and there's a
Right.
time and a place. But if we're looking at the big picture, when you're trying to just like say we're 3 months out, more often than not, it's let's do this right.
Right.
Let's give our body what it's ready for. Now if we're talking like this is like your hell week, where they're just going to get the crap kicked out of them so that they understand what they're in for, or
Right.
get them ready. The mentality, okay, that might be another story. But that like the autonomy of that whole system, like once they understand how they can make those changes, like you said, like maybe it might be volume, or I mean, we were doing one set, so obviously it changes things a little bit. But they could make that decision on their own, and more often than not, we saw really, really good effects from that,
Right.
and the results spoke for themselves. I mean, the record board, we crushed a ton of records. I mean, putting up numbers that are like offensive linemen in the NFL. I mean, it's
Yeah.
crazy some of the stuff that we saw up there, but it's because they understood it, and so they took some of that work out for us when we were working with 100 guys. It
Mm-hmm.
made it easier for us to do that, and most situations you don't have that that understanding, but you have to be able to make that call, like you said, where it's we can do this or this because you're obviously not feeling it today. Let's make sure that we're not putting ourselves more in the hole. We're not digging our own grave here.
Right. Because at the end of the day, guys got to be ready to play Sunday, and it's
Yep.
you know we can go and do what we need to do, and we can get in what we need to get in, but that might be different for one or two guys as opposed to the whole team. And again, it's not like you have to make massive adjustments to all sorts of different people. So like our young cats today, there were three guys that it's like practice was obviously a bear for you last night, so let's feel it out. One of them got moving, said he felt great. He's like, I want to go today. Like, all right, there you go. Take the leash off, and the puppy can go run around in the yard. One of them, the first time he picked the bar up, I was just like, holy shit. like, it was one of those days where it was
No.
my gosh. And I'm like, how'd that feel? And you get one of those like looks where it's like if you turn the lights
Yeah.
off, they just pass out face first right into the floor. I'm like, good grief. All right, well, let's just kind of feel it out today, and let's not be too crazy. But it is, I've said this before, and I'll say it again. Da Vinci was an artist, and he was a scientist. It was you got to be able to wear both hats. Even though there are so many things that can draw you in a great direction. Yeah, I think that we both would agree on you need to be able to be mobile with your programming, and make those changes, but you also have to have a specific direction and understand that, in the weight room we're still kind of like the third step. So if you got a kid and they need to go spend more time shooting free throws than doing dumbbell bench, then they need to spend more time doing shooting free throws.
Yeah.
So it sucks, but that's just the way it works.
Yeah.
So it's
An ideal situation would be the head coach, strength coach, athletic trainer, whoever. They all work together, and they say, but everyone's kind of here. Like maybe practice, we need to cut it 15 minutes today. Or maybe we don't do this today because that's not going to work out well. If you think that Friday is that important, or like maybe they compete on Friday, and if we want them to perform well, like this and this might not be great ideas, but it's still their call at the end of the day.
right.
But having that conversation is like that's the best way to really handle it. But sometimes, fortunately, that doesn't always happen.
Oh, no doubt.
It's so yeah, like you said, sometimes they need to go and practice shooting, and I mean, there's only one thing that really matters in basketball, and that's buckets, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's so if they can't make a bucket, then it doesn't
Yeah.
matter if they can bench 450.
Yeah, stops and buckets. That's really it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, and I think that understanding too that there's just sometimes that you gotta go. I mean, no matter what. Like if people need to learn something, they need to learn something. If there's a time when you need to kind of grind with the kids, you need to grind with the kids a little bit. And it's as much as I hate that term, but
Yeah. I mean, it's
just kind of the reality of the situation. But Tim, I think this has been an awesome talk, man, and I think there's a ton of great information that hopefully can help people get their mind wrapped around some things when it comes to just looking at what they're doing with their kids and how they can handle them a little better.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you having me. For anyone out there listening who hasn't been to Jay's seminar, I can't stress enough how great of an opportunity it is for you. I mean, I met two people who were my bosses after working for you, both at that seminar. Whether or not it was backpack years. I mean, we're talking grad position that got me, went up to grad school, helped me pay for my master's, and then, the eventual job at Omegawave. I mean, we're talking networking. You have some of the best coaches in the world, it's presenters. I mean, we're talking, you have your Hank Krajinoffs, your Bondarchuks. I mean, you can't really get much better than that. And, if you haven't been to Jay's seminar, you got to check it out. I mean, now with you're doing the deal where you stay on campus and you got food, I mean, can't really beat that, So if you should come to the seminar. I'll be there. I'm a Richmond local, so we can talk Omegawave. They're Ben Peterson has talked in the past. Catapult's always there. Coach Me Plus. I mean, we're talking the best companies and okay, that might be a little biased. Some of the best companies in sports. We're always there showing up and representing. And, if you're thinking about buying a system, I'll also plug our website, omegawave.com. If you haven't, you've probably heard about us a ton on Jay's podcast, but, feel free to check us out. You can always you can put my contact email. If you guys have any questions about Omegawave, feel free to give me a shout. I'm here to answer any kind of questions you might have. You're thinking about getting it for your school, your team, just for yourself. Feel free to hit me up.
Yeah, and it's a great system. It'll make you learn. That's for sure. It'll make you have some patience, and it'll make you do better things. And it really has.
I think you said it during the talk earlier. Is that often if you get a new system and you're a good coach, you end up getting a lot of questions, maybe than answers. But I think those questions, when we were working together, we found some pretty good answers from those questions, and so, I'm a big fan of Omegawave, both working for the company, but as a user, and before I even, knew when I was working for you, I mean, I thought it was cooler than sliced bread. I mean, so.
It's great, man. It really is, and it's helped us a bunch. And I appreciate the kind words about the seminar, man. I really do, and we're gonna start announcing speakers really soon.
I look forward to that.
Yeah, we might actually drop the first one this Wednesday. So, yeah, July's coming, folks. Hopefully we see you here in the good old RVA. It's going to be insane, July 15th and 16th. Timmy, thanks again, man. We'll catch up real
Jay.
soon.
Yeah, I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Again, a great thank you to Omegawave's Tim Rusbasan for coming out and spending some time with us today and talking monitoring. Guys, Timmy obviously was my assistant here. He's been involved with the seminar really almost since the inception, both as a coach and now through Omegawave. So I'm really happy to have had him on and to be able to talk about monitoring and the tech and other just general monitoring ideas, to help people start to figure this out a little bit better. Hope you guys enjoy the talk, because as always, leave your comments and questions below. As like Tim said, he's a Richmond local, so if you got questions or comments or anything you want to bounce off him, leave them below. He'll get right back to you guys. And as always, guys, thank you for being part of this. We'll be back next week with another great guest here on the podcast.